Okay, before we start shooting, we need a decent understanding of the fundamentals and the basic settings of photography. And this triangle, fuck. All right, before we start shooting, you need a. All right, before we start shooting. All right, before we start shooting, it's important to get the basic settings of photography down. And this triangle represents those basic settings. They are ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. All right, before we start shooting, we need a basic understanding of the settings of photography. And the basic settings of photography are shown in what is called the exposure triangle. And those basic settings are ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. Now, the first one is called ISO. ISO is the camera's sensitivity to light. The lower the ISO is, the darker your photo is going to be. But the higher your ISO is, the more light is going to be let into the photo. But the downside of ISO is that the higher your ISO is, the more grain or the more noise is going to be shown in your photo as seen in the photo on the right. The second setting is called aperture. Aperture also controls the amount of light that comes through your camera. But the difference between aperture and ISO is that aperture can also control the depth of field, also known as the amount of blur in your photo. And the lower your aperture value is, the more blur is going to be shown in your photo, as seen in the photo on the left. And the second. All right, but before we start shooting, we need a basic understanding of the settings of photography and the basic fundamentals. And the settings of photography can be represented in this triangle. This is called the exposure triangle, and it includes ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. Now, the first one is called ISO. ISO is the camera's sensitivity to light. The lower your ISO value is, the less light comes through. The higher your ISO is, the more